The phone buzzed persistently against the marble countertop, its vibration echoing through Victoria Sterling's pristine Manhattan penthouse kitchen, like a warning she couldn't yet understand. She glanced at the device while measuring coffee beans, noting it wasn't her usual morning call from Richard. "Victoria, darling, pack light for Aspen. Just the essentials and that red dress I love," came her husband's familiar voice from the speaker she'd accidentally activated. At 52, Victoria had perfected the art of moving through their morning routine with practiced efficiency. 20 years of marriage to tech mogul Richard Sterling had taught her the rhythm of his schedules, his preferences, his habits. The coffee maker hissed to life while the morning news murmured from the wall-mounted television, creating the soundtrack of their wealthy, ordered life. Victoria's slight Southern accent, a remnant from her Georgia roots, softened her words as she called back toward the phone. "The Armani or the Versace?" But Richard's voice continued, not responding to her question. "I can't wait to have you to myself for the weekend. No interruptions, no pretending." Victoria's hand stilled on the coffee maker. Richard was supposed to be in his study, preparing for his morning video conference with the Tokyo office. She looked toward the hallway, confused. "Richard," she called, but his voice kept coming from the phone. "I know, sweetheart. Just a few more months and this charade will be over. I promise you, Amanda, everything will work out exactly as we planned." The coffee cup slipped from Victoria's fingers, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of white porcelain and dark liquid. Amanda. Richard had said Amanda. Victoria's world tilted as she realized what had happened. Her phone had died during the night, and in her morning routine, she'd grabbed Richard's identical device from the charging station. She was listening to his private conversation with another woman. "Richard, honey, when are you telling her I can't keep pretending I don't exist?" came an unfamiliar voice, young and confident in a way that made Victoria's stomach clench. "Soon, darling. The timing has to be perfect. Victoria can't suspect anything until all the pieces are in place." Victoria stood frozen in her silk pajamas. Carmen, the housekeeper's arrival, still an hour away. Miguel, the driver, not due until 9. She was completely alone with this devastating revelation crackling through the speaker of her millionaire husband's phone. "You promised me the Hamptons house," the young woman continued. "I've already been planning the renovations, and you'll have it. Amanda, everything I told you will be yours. The prenup protects us both. Remember, if she files for divorce without cause, she gets almost nothing. But if I can prove she's been unfaithful or is psychologically unstable, I keep everything." Victoria's legs gave way, and she sank onto one of the leather bar stools that surrounded their kitchen island. Richard's voice continued, each word driving deeper into her chest like a blade. "I've been documenting her behavior, making notes about her mood swings, her spending, her drinking. My lawyers are confident we can paint a picture of an unstable woman who's been living off my success for 2 decades. The young woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Poor Victoria. She has no idea what's coming. None at all. She's been sleepwalking through our marriage for years. This will be the kindest thing I've ever done for her. Honestly, she'll finally have to stand on her own feet." Victoria's hand trembled as she reached for the phone, her finger hovering over the end call button. Part of her wanted to keep listening, to learn every detail of their betrayal. Another part wanted to throw the device against the wall and watch it shatter like her 20-year marriage. "I have to go. Amanda, she'll be wondering where I am. I love you, Richard. I love you too, sweetheart. Just remember, 18 more months and this will all be over." The call ended, leaving Victoria in the silence of her kitchen, surrounded by the debris of her broken coffee cup and her shattered life. She looked around at the space she'd designed herself, every detail reflecting her taste, her vision, the Italian marble countertops, the custom cabinetry, the professional-grade appliances they'd purchased when Richard's second company sold for $50 million. She thought about the prenup Richard's lawyer had insisted they sign before their wedding. At the time, Richard had presented it as protection for both of them. If either party commits adultery, she remembered the lawyer saying, the innocent spouse receives 100% of marital assets. Richard had claimed it would prevent either of them from ever being tempted to stray, knowing the financial consequences would be devastating. Now she understood the real strategy. Richard had been planning this divorce for months, maybe years, carefully documenting anything he could use against her while conducting his own affair. The prenup he'd insisted would protect their marriage was actually designed to destroy her. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, her best friend since college. "Lunch today at Daniel, I have news about the gallery opening." Victoria stared at the message, wondering how she could possibly sit through lunch and pretend her world hadn't just collapsed. But she needed to think, to plan, and most importantly, to keep Richard from suspecting she knew anything. She typed back carefully, "Looking forward to it. See you at 1." Then she knelt on the marble floor and began picking up the pieces of broken porcelain, each fragment sharp enough to draw blood if she wasn't careful. Just like the pieces of her marriage, she realized. She'd been handling them carelessly for far too long. From the hallway came the sound of Richard's footsteps, his voice calling cheerfully, "Victoria, is everything all right? I thought I heard something break." Victoria arranged her face into the expression of mild annoyance she'd perfected over 2 decades of marriage. "Just a coffee cup. I'm getting clumsy in my old age." Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway, his silver hair perfectly styled, his designer shirt crisp and expensive. At 55, he maintained the confident bearing that had attracted her when they'd met at a tech conference in San Francisco. She'd been building her interior design firm then, young and ambitious and foolishly in love. "You're not old, darling," he said, checking his watch. "You're seasoned. Like a fine wine." The same words he'd probably used on Amanda, Victoria thought. She wondered how many women had heard Richard's practiced charm, his calculated compliments. "I'll have Carmen clean this up when she arrives," Victoria said, standing and brushing off her hands. "How was your call with Tokyo?" "Productive," Richard lied smoothly. "I need to pack for Chicago tomorrow. Another client emergency." Victoria nodded, already wondering if Amanda would be joining him in Chicago, or if this was simply another weekend getaway disguised as business. 20 years of marriage, and she'd never questioned his travel schedule, his long hours, his frequent conferences. "I'll have your suits pressed," she said automatically. Richard kissed her cheek, the same perfunctory gesture he'd been giving her for months. Up close, she could smell an unfamiliar perfume on his collar, something floral and young and completely unlike anything she wore. "You're wonderful, Victoria. I don't know what I'd do without you." The words hung in the kitchen air like poison as Richard disappeared back down the hallway. Victoria knew exactly what he planned to do without her. She'd heard every detail of his strategy, every lie he'd prepared, every piece of the trap he'd been setting. But Richard Sterling had made one crucial mistake. The prenup he'd designed to destroy her would work both ways. If Victoria could prove he was the one committing adultery, she would be entitled to everything, every asset, every investment, every dollar of the fortune they'd built together. Victoria smiled for the first time in weeks as she swept the last fragments of porcelain into her palm. Richard thought she'd been sleepwalking through their marriage, but he was about to discover that she'd simply been resting. Now it was time to wake up. Daniel Restaurant buzzed with the familiar energy of Manhattan's elite, crystal glasses catching the afternoon light as Victoria Sterling sat across from her best friend Sarah Chen at their usual corner table. The maitre d' had greeted Victoria with the deference reserved for regular customers, who tipped well and never caused scenes. "You look pale," Sarah said, reaching across the white tablecloth to touch Victoria's hand. "Actually, you look like hell. What's wrong?" Victoria forced the smile she'd been practicing in the taxi. "Just tired. Richard's been traveling so much lately." "Bull," Sarah replied, her dark eyes narrowing with the intensity that had made her a successful art gallery owner. "I've known you since college, Victoria. You get that same look when you're hiding something. Remember when you found out about Professor Martinez's wife?" The reference to their shared past made Victoria's carefully constructed composure crack slightly. Sarah had been there through every major crisis of Victoria's life, from failed relationships to family deaths to business struggles. She was the one person who might actually understand the magnitude of what Victoria had discovered. "Sarah," Victoria began, then stopped. The words felt too dangerous to speak aloud, as if saying them would make Richard's betrayal more real. A waiter appeared with their usual orders. Salmon for Victoria, who'd barely eaten in the 3 days since overhearing Richard's phone call. Caesar salad for Sarah, who maintained her gallery owner's figure with religious discipline. "Is it Richard?" Sarah asked quietly once they were alone again. Victoria's southern accent thickened when she was emotional, and she heard it creeping into her voice as she replied, "Do you ever wonder what would happen if everything you built your life on turned out to be a lie?" Sarah set down her fork, her expression shifting from concern to alarm. "Victoria, that's not an abstract question. What happened?" Victoria looked around the restaurant, noting the other women their age lunching together, discussing children and grandchildren and vacation homes, women who seemed secure in their marriages, their lives, their futures. Had she looked that confident just a week ago? "I overheard a conversation," Victoria said finally. "Richard thinks I don't know, but I know everything. Everything about what? About Amanda, about his plan to divorce me, about how he's been documenting my behavior to make me look unstable." The words tumbled out in a rush, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, then something that looked almost like relief. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. "You knew I suspected," Sarah said carefully. "Last month at the Morrison Gallery opening, I saw Richard with a young blonde woman. They were very close. When I mentioned it to you, you said he was probably just networking." Victoria remembered that conversation, remembered dismissing Sarah's concern with the confidence of a woman who trusted her husband completely. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it, and because I hoped I was wrong." Sarah's voice softened. "Tell me exactly what you heard." Victoria recounted the phone conversation, watching Sarah's expression grow darker with each revelation. When she finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment, absently stirring her untouched coffee. "The prenup," Sarah said finally. "I remember when you signed it, you were so happy that Richard wanted to protect both of you from temptation." 20 years ago, I thought it was romantic," Victoria said bitterly. "A promise that we'd always be faithful to each other." "What exactly does it say?" Victoria closed her eyes, reciting the words that had once seemed like a declaration of love. "If either party commits adultery, the innocent spouse receives 100% of marital assets." Sarah's eyebrows rose. 100%? Richard's lawyer insisted on the language, said it would be a strong deterrent against infidelity for both parties. "Victoria," Sarah said slowly, "do you understand what this means if you can prove Richard is cheating? You get everything. All of it." "I know," Victoria said, "but proving it won't be easy. Richard is careful, and he has excellent lawyers. Better than his conscience, apparently." Sarah leaned forward. "What are you going to do?" Victoria thought about the question she'd been asking herself for 3 sleepless nights. Her first instinct had been to confront Richard immediately, to scream and cry and demand explanations. But 20 years of marriage to a calculating man had taught her the value of patience and strategy. "I'm going to investigate," Victoria said. "Carefully, quietly. I need evidence that will hold up in court. Can I help?" "You already are, just by listening. I need to keep pretending everything is normal while I figure out how much Richard has hidden from me." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "Patricia Kowalski, best divorce attorney in Manhattan. I know her through the gallery world. She's represented several wealthy women in nasty divorces." Victoria took the card, feeling its weight like a weapon. "Sarah, what if I'm wrong? What if there's an explanation? Honey, you heard him planning to frame you as unstable. You heard him promise another woman your house. There's no innocent explanation for that." The truth of Sarah's words settled over Victoria like a heavy blanket. She thought about the life she'd built with Richard, the compromises she'd made. When they'd married, she'd been building a successful interior design firm, working with high-end clients, making a name for herself in Manhattan's competitive design world. Richard had convinced her to sell the firm after his first company's success, arguing that they didn't need the stress of 2 demanding careers. "I'll support you while you build your dream projects," he'd promised. "No more difficult clients or tight deadlines. You can take on only the jobs you love." But the dream projects had never materialized. Instead, Victoria had found herself managing their social calendar, their homes, their image. She'd become a full-time wife to a millionaire husband, her own ambitions slowly suffocating under the weight of his expectations. "I gave up everything for him," Victoria said, surprised by the anger in her own voice. My business? My independence? My identity? I became exactly what he wanted me to be. And now he's throwing you away for a younger model, Sarah said bluntly. But Victoria, you're not the same woman you were 20 years ago. You're stronger now, even if you don't feel it. I feel like I'm drowning. Then learn to swim. Fast. Sarah signaled for the check. Start with the lawyer. Patricia will tell you exactly what evidence you need and how to get it. Victoria looked at the business card again, running her thumb over the embossed letters. Patricia Kowalski, attorney at law, specializing in high net worth divorce cases. What if Richard finds out I'm investigating him? Then you'll deal with it. But Victoria, you can't unknow what you know. This marriage is over. The only question now is whether you're going to let him destroy you or whether you're going to fight back. Victoria thought about Amanda's confident voice on Richard's phone, discussing renovation plans for the Hamptons house Victoria had decorated herself. She thought about Richard's careful documentation of her unstable behavior, his plan to paint her as a gold digger who'd contributed nothing to their marriage. I'm going to fight, Victoria said, her voice steady for the first time in days. Richard thinks I've been sleepwalking through our marriage, but he's about to find out I was just saving my energy. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Victoria had seen from her friend in months. There's the Victoria Sterling I remember, the one who built a design firm from nothing and scared the hell out of every competitor in Manhattan. That woman feels like a stranger to me now. Then it's time to reintroduce yourself. And Victoria, when this is over, you're going to be free, really free, for the first time in 20 years. Victoria left the restaurant with Patricia Kowalski's business card in her purse and a plan forming in her mind. Richard Sterling had spent months preparing to destroy her, but he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd underestimated the woman he'd married, the woman who'd been quietly watching and learning and preparing for a battle he didn't even know was coming. The prenup Richard had designed as her prison was about to become his own trap, and Victoria Sterling was going to make sure he fell into it. Victoria Sterling sat in her home office, the space she'd designed as a sanctuary but now felt like a war room. Richard had left for Chicago that morning, kissing her cheek with the same practiced affection he'd shown for months while promising another woman her house. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd waited 2 hours after Miguel dropped Richard at the airport before beginning her investigation, her laptop open to their joint bank account statements. 20 years of marriage had given her access to most of their financial information, but she was beginning to understand how little she'd actually been paying attention. The credit card statements told a story she'd been blind to for months. Expensive restaurants she'd never visited, charged to Richard's American Express card on nights when he'd claimed to be working late. Le Bernardin last Tuesday, when he'd texted her that he was stuck in budget meetings. Four Seasons restaurant 3 weeks ago, when he'd said he was having dinner with potential investors. Victoria's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the charges. Each entry felt like a small betrayal, evidence of a parallel life Richard had been living while she arranged their dinner parties and managed their social calendar. Hotel charges appeared with suspicious frequency. The St. Regis in San Francisco, 2 nights when Richard had claimed he needed to travel alone to close a difficult deal. The Ritz-Carlton in Boston, charged to his corporate card but listed as personal expenses. Each hotel stay showed room service charges for 2, champagne and strawberries at prices that made Victoria's stomach turn. Romantic weekend getaways, she whispered to herself, charged to our account while I stayed home planning his birthday party. But it was the jewelry purchases that made her hands shake with rage. Tiffany charges appearing monthly, always for amounts that wouldn't trigger her attention, but collectively representing thousands of dollars. 2 identical diamond tennis bracelets purchased in March, one of which she'd never received. Matching earrings from Harry Winston, bought the same week Richard had told her they needed to be more careful with their spending. Victoria thought about her own jewelry box, filled with pieces Richard had given her over the years. How many of those gifts had he also purchased for Amanda? How many romantic gestures had been duplicated, mass-produced like their marriage had become? She opened their home computer's browser history, something she'd never thought to check in 20 years of marriage. Richard was usually careful about deleting his tracks, but he'd grown careless in recent weeks, probably confident that his trusting wife would never think to investigate. The searches made her nauseous. Best Divorce Lawyers Manhattan. How to Prove Spouse is Mentally Unstable. Prenup Enforcement, New York State. Asset Protection During Divorce Proceedings. Richard had been researching divorce law for 6 months, learning how to destroy her while she'd been planning their anniversary party. Victoria clicked deeper into the browser history, finding searches that revealed the scope of his deception. Offshore banking Cayman Islands. How to hide assets from divorce court. Private investigator hire Manhattan. Durham, her millionaire husband had been planning this betrayal with the same methodical approach he brought to his business deals. Every detail calculated, every contingency planned, every possible weakness in her position identified and exploited. She found saved documents in a folder labeled Legal Research, hidden deep in Richard's business files. Her hands shook as she opened them, reading Richard's own notes about her behavior, her habits, her vulnerabilities. Victoria drinks 2 glasses of wine most evenings, sometimes 3 on weekends. Could suggest alcohol dependency. Victoria spends excessively on clothing and home decoration. Last month's spending included $3,000 at Bergdorf Goodman for items she claims she needed for social functions. Victoria has become increasingly isolated from friends outside our social circle. Displays signs of depression and anxiety, possibly requiring psychological evaluation. Each entry was dated and detailed, a careful construction of evidence designed to paint her as an unstable gold digger. Victoria realized that every conversation, every dinner party, every social interaction had been an opportunity for Richard to gather ammunition against her. But Richard's thoroughness would also be his downfall. In documenting her behavior, he'd also documented his own absences, his unexplained trips, his changing patterns. Victoria began making her own notes, cross-referencing his business meetings with the credit card charges and hotel receipts. The pattern became clear. Richard had been conducting his affairs systematically, using his business travel as cover while building a case against Victoria's character. But he'd also left a trail of evidence that a competent attorney could use to prove his adultery. Victoria opened Richard's backup phone account, something she'd helped him set up years ago for international travel. He'd never changed the password, probably forgetting she had access. Her breath caught as months of text messages to Amanda loaded on the screen. Can't wait to see you in San Francisco. My love. Book the usual suite at the St. Regis. Victoria suspects nothing. She's too busy planning dinner parties to notice I'm planning our future. Just 18 more months until I can leave her. Then we'll have everything we've dreamed of. Amanda, you're getting half of everything I've built. The prenup ensures she gets almost nothing if I can prove she's unfit. Victoria read message after message, each one revealing new depths of Richard's betrayal. Amanda wasn't just his mistress. She was his accomplice in a calculated plan to steal Victoria's life. The photographs were the worst part. Richard and Amanda in Aspen, wearing matching ski outfits Victoria had helped him select. Amanda wearing the diamond tennis bracelet Victoria had never received. Richard's arm around Amanda's waist at restaurants Victoria recognized, places they'd gone together for anniversaries and special occasions. In one photo, Amanda was wearing Victoria's own cashmere coat, the one that had mysteriously disappeared from her closet 6 months ago. Richard had claimed the cleaning service must have lost it, had even offered to file an insurance claim. Now Victoria understood where it had gone. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Chicago meeting's running late. Don't wait up. Love you. Victoria looked at the timestamp, then checked his credit card account. He'd charged dinner at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse 20 minutes ago, but not a business dinner. The receipt showed champagne, oysters, and 2 entrees. Richard was dining with Amanda while texting lies to his wife. Victoria's anger crystallized into something cold and focused. Richard thought she was naive, trusting, and dependent. He'd built his entire strategy around her supposed weaknesses, never considering that those same qualities might make her dangerous when properly motivated. She began printing everything: bank statements, credit card charges, hotel receipts, text messages, photographs. Each page represented another piece of evidence in what would become Richard's destruction. He documented her life to use against her. Now she would document his betrayal to use against him. The backup phone buzzed with a new message from Amanda. Richard, honey, I found the perfect dress for the charity gala. It's the same designer Victoria always wears, but I look better in it. Victoria smiled grimly as she screenshot the message. Amanda's arrogance would be another weapon in her arsenal. Every boast, every insult, every casual cruelty was being preserved as evidence of their affair. By midnight, Victoria had assembled a comprehensive file of Richard's infidelity, financial evidence, digital communications, travel records, and photographic proof of his relationship with Amanda. But she knew it wasn't enough yet. She needed more, and she needed professional help to ensure her evidence would hold up in court. Tomorrow, she would call Patricia Kowalski. Tonight, she would continue playing the role of the trusting wife, the woman Richard thought he could easily discard. But inside, Victoria Sterling was transforming from victim to predator, and her prey had no idea he was being hunted. She closed the laptop and went upstairs to the bedroom she'd shared with Richard for 20 years. The room where he'd held her and promised to love her forever while planning to destroy her. For the first time in months, Victoria fell asleep easily, dreaming of justice and freedom and a future where Richard Sterling's lies could never touch her again. Victoria Sterling woke to the sound of rain against her bedroom windows and the buzz of Richard's backup phone, which she'd hidden in her nightstand drawer. She'd been monitoring his communications for a week now, building her case one lie at a time, but nothing had prepared her for the messages waiting when she opened the device. The text thread with Amanda revealed a level of planning that made Victoria's blood run cold. These weren't just the passionate exchanges of an affair. They were the detailed communications of two people plotting to steal her life. "Richard, darling," Amanda had written at midnight, "I've been thinking about our timeline. Are you sure 18 months isn't too long? I'm tired of hiding." Richard's response, sent from his Chicago hotel room while Victoria slept alone in Manhattan, was even worse. "Be patient, sweetheart. Victoria is more suspicious lately. I need more time to document her instability. The prenup requires ironclad proof of her unfitness. Anna, what if she finds out about us?" "She won't. Victoria lives in a bubble of designer clothes and charity lunches. She hasn't questioned my travel schedule once in 20 years. She's too dependent on the lifestyle I've provided to risk losing it." Victoria's hands shook as she read Richard's casual dismissal of her intelligence, his confidence that she would never threaten his plans. The man she'd loved for 2 decades saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Amanda's response revealed even more disturbing details. "I can't wait to redecorate the Hamptons house. Those awful florals Victoria chose are so dated. I'm thinking modern minimalist. Maybe some Basquiat pieces for the living room? Whatever you want. Love, once the divorce is final, everything will be ours. The prenup ensures she gets almost nothing if I can prove adultery or mental instability on her part. How are you going to prove she's unstable? I've been documenting everything. Her drinking, her spending, her isolation from friends. My attorney thinks we can build a strong case that she's suffering from depression and possibly alcohol dependency. Combined with evidence of her affair, it should be enough." Victoria's breath caught. Richard was planning to frame her for infidelity while conducting his own affair with Amanda. The sheer audacity of his strategy was breathtaking. "What affair?" Amanda had asked. "Victoria doesn't seem the type." "She doesn't have one yet," Richard replied, "but she will. I'm going to create the evidence we need." Victoria set the phone down, her mind reeling. Richard wasn't just planning to divorce her, he was planning to destroy her reputation, her credibility, and her future. The prenup that was supposed to protect their marriage had become the weapon he would use to leave her with nothing. She scrolled through more messages, each one revealing new layers of their conspiracy. Amanda wasn't just some young mistress seduced by a married man. She was an active participant in planning Victoria's destruction, already making lists of which friends she wanted to keep and which social commitments she planned to abandon. "I ran into that awful Patricia Morrison at Bergdorf yesterday," Amanda had texted. "She asked me how I knew you. I told her I was consulting on your new office design. She seemed to believe it. Good thinking. The more people who see us together professionally, the better. It provides cover for our relationship." Victoria recognized Patricia Morrison's name. She was one of Victoria's oldest friends, someone who'd known her since before her marriage to Richard. That Amanda was already lying to Victoria's friends, already establishing herself in Victoria's social circle, felt like a violation beyond the affair itself. The photographs in their message thread were even more devastating. Amanda wearing Victoria's jewelry at restaurants Victoria had never visited. Amanda lounging by pools at resorts Richard claimed to visit for business conferences. Amanda in the passenger seat of Richard's Tesla, wearing the diamond earrings he'd given Victoria for their 15th anniversary. One photo made Victoria's stomach lurch. Amanda was standing in what looked like a real estate office, holding keys and smiling triumphantly. The message attached read, "Just signed the lease on our love nest, 2 bedrooms on the Upper East Side, walking distance to your office. Can't wait to play house with you." Richard had been setting up a second home with Amanda, while Victoria managed their primary residences. He'd been building a parallel life, complete with shared living space and joint financial commitments. Victoria found Amanda's Instagram account linked in one of their conversations. The young woman's profile was a carefully curated collection of luxury lifestyle photos, designer handbags, expensive dinners, exotic vacations. Many of the locations Victoria recognized as places she'd visited with Richard. But the photos were dated months after their trips. Richard had been taking Amanda to their special places, recreating romantic moments from his marriage while planning to end it. The betrayal felt like a physical assault, each image another blow to her sense of reality. Amanda's bio read, "Interior design consultant, living my best life in NYC." She'd stolen Victoria's profession along with her husband, presenting herself as an expert in the field Victoria had abandoned to support Richard's career. Victoria scrolled through Amanda's followers, recognizing several names from their social circle. People who knew Victoria and Richard as a couple were following his mistress, possibly unaware of the connection, but unknowingly validating Amanda's presence in their world. The most recent photos showed Amanda at events Victoria remembered attending alone, claiming Richard was traveling for business. The Marlborough Gallery opening last month, where Victoria had felt overdressed and out of place, Amanda had been there too, photographed with people Victoria knew, establishing herself as part of their social ecosystem. Victoria's phone rang, startling her from her investigation. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and she answered with the cheerful tone she'd been perfecting for weeks. "Good morning, darling. How was your evening in Chicago?" "Exhausting," Richard lied smoothly. "Client dinners always run too late. I'm looking forward to being home tonight." Victoria checked Amanda's Instagram story, posted just hours ago. A photo of champagne glasses at what looked like a hotel bar, with the caption, "Perfect night with my favorite person." The timestamp showed it was taken while Richard was supposed to be in business meetings. "I missed you," Victoria said, testing how easily the lies came to him now. "I missed you too, sweetheart. I'll make it up to you this weekend. Maybe we can drive to the Hamptons. Just the two of us." Victoria almost laughed at the suggestion. Richard probably wanted to show Amanda the house again. Let her make more plans for redecorating while Victoria played the unknowing wife. But instead of anger, Victoria felt something like relief. Every lie Richard told her was another piece of evidence for her divorce attorney. "That sounds wonderful," Victoria replied. "I'll have Carmen pack our bags." After ending the call, Victoria returned to Richard's backup phone. A new message from Amanda had appeared while she was talking to her husband. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I bought something special to wear. Or rather, something special not to wear." Victoria took a screenshot of the message, adding it to her growing collection of evidence. Richard's flight wasn't scheduled to land for 6 hours, but apparently Amanda was planning a reunion that had nothing to do with business travel. She opened her laptop and began researching Amanda herself, using the same investigative skills she'd developed as a business owner 20 years ago. Social media accounts, professional profiles, public records. The young woman Richard was planning to destroy his marriage for wasn't quite what she appeared to be. Amanda Chen was 28 years old, originally from Los Angeles, with a bachelor's degree from a mediocre design school and no significant work experience before joining Richard's company as an interior design consultant 18 months ago. Her salary, which Victoria found in their business filings, was disproportionate to her qualifications or responsibilities. More interesting was Amanda's financial history. Credit reports showed significant debt before she'd started working for Richard, followed by a dramatic improvement in her circumstances. New car loan, expensive apartment lease, designer shopping habits that exceeded her stated income. Richard had been supporting Amanda's lifestyle while telling Victoria they needed to be more careful with their spending. Victoria found Amanda's previous social media posts before she'd started curating her image as a successful Manhattan professional. Photos from Los Angeles showed a different person: struggling actress, working restaurant jobs, posting about auditions and rejections and financial stress. Amanda had reinvented herself as an interior designer to get close to Richard, targeting him specifically for his wealth and status. The realization hit Victoria like a physical blow. She wasn't just being replaced by a younger woman. She was being replaced by a professional gold digger who'd studied Richard's weaknesses and exploited them. Amanda had researched her target, learned his preferences, and presented herself as exactly what he wanted while planning to take everything he'd built. But Amanda had made the same mistake Richard had. She'd underestimated Victoria Sterling, the woman who'd built a successful design firm from nothing, who'd navigated Manhattan's competitive social world for 20 years, who'd supported Richard's career while maintaining her own identity beneath the surface. Victoria saved every message, every photo, every piece of evidence that would prove Richard's infidelity and Amanda's role in destroying their marriage. The prenup that was supposed to protect their union would instead become the instrument of Richard's destruction. Justice, Victoria realized, was going to be sweeter than revenge, and she was going to serve it to both of them on a silver platter, gift-wrapped with the evidence of their own arrogance and stupidity. The elevator in Patricia Kowalski's building climbed toward the 42nd floor. With the smooth efficiency Victoria had come to associate with serious money and serious power. The law firm of Kowalski, Brennan and Associates, occupied 3 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper, their reputation built on representing wealthy women in high-stakes divorce proceedings. Victoria clutched her leather portfolio containing 2 weeks' worth of evidence against Richard and Amanda. She'd printed everything: financial records, hotel receipts, text messages, photographs, and Amanda's social media posts. The documentation filled a 3-inch binder that felt like a weapon in her hands. "Mrs. Sterling," the receptionist said with professional warmth, "Ms. Kowalski is ready for you." Patricia Kowalski's corner office overlooked Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows providing a view that probably cost more per month than most people's salaries. The attorney herself was a woman in her early 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of confidence that came from winning battles other lawyers wouldn't dare fight. "Sarah Chen speaks very highly of you," Patricia said, gesturing for Victoria to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her massive mahogany desk. "She tells me you're dealing with a cheating husband and a prenup situation." "It's more complicated than that," Victoria replied, opening her portfolio. "My husband has been planning to divorce me for months while conducting an affair. He's been documenting my behavior to make me appear unstable, hoping to use our prenup against me." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. "Tell me about this prenup." Victoria recited the terms she'd memorized 20 years ago. If either party commits adultery, the innocent spouse receives 100% of marital assets. 100%? Patricia leaned forward. "That's unusual. Most prenups limit alimony and asset division, but they rarely transfer everything to the innocent party." Richard's lawyer insisted on the language. He said it would prevent either of us from being tempted to stray. "And now your husband is the one straying." Patricia's smile was predatory. "I've been practicing family law for 30 years, and I can tell you that wealthy men who insist on infidelity clauses in their prenups are usually the ones planning to cheat. They just want to make sure their wives won't dare to leave them first." Victoria pulled out the first section of her evidence file. "I have documentation of Richard's affair going back 18 months. Text messages, photographs, financial records, travel receipts. He's been conducting a relationship with his interior design consultant while building a case that I'm mentally unstable." Patricia examined the documents with the methodical attention of a surgeon. She read through Richard's text messages, studied the hotel receipts, and reviewed the credit card statements with professional detachment. "This is excellent work," Patricia said finally. "Your husband has been remarkably careless for someone planning such an elaborate deception. These text messages alone prove adultery beyond any reasonable doubt." "There's more," Victoria said, pulling out Amanda's social media posts and financial records. "The other woman has been documenting their relationship online and spending money Richard has been giving her while telling me we need to reduce our expenses." Patricia studied Amanda's Instagram account, noting the expensive dinners, designer clothes, and luxury vacations that exceeded the young woman's stated income. "She's not very bright. Is she posting evidence of her affair with a married man where anyone can see it? Richard doesn't think I'm smart enough to investigate them. Well, he's about to learn otherwise." Patricia set the documents aside and looked directly at Victoria. Mrs. Sterling, with this evidence, you have an excellent chance of enforcing your prenup exactly as written. Your husband's adultery is provable, which means you would be entitled to receive 100% of marital assets. What does that include exactly? Patricia consulted the financial documents Victoria had provided. Based on these records, your husband's assets include approximately $12 million in various accounts: your Manhattan penthouse, the Hamptons house, his Tesla, a portfolio of investments, and his shares in 2 technology companies. Under the prenup terms, all of it would become yours. Victoria felt a wave of satisfaction that surprised her with its intensity. Richard thinks the prenup protects him. He's been telling Amanda she'll get half of everything. He's wrong on both counts. The prenup protects the innocent spouse, which is you, and his mistress has no legal claim to marital assets. Patricia paused, studying Victoria's face. Are you prepared for what this process will involve? Your husband won't give up $12 million without a fight. What kind of fight? He'll challenge your evidence, claim the affair never happened, possibly argue that you're the one who's been unfaithful. Wealthy men facing financial ruin become very creative in their desperation. Victoria thought about Richard's plan to frame her for infidelity, his documentation of her supposed mental instability. He's already planning to claim I'm unstable and unfaithful. I have evidence of his strategy. Then we'll be ready for him. Patricia's confidence was reassuring. Mrs. Sterling, I've represented many women in situations similar to yours. 50-something women who discover their husband's affairs and realize they've been living with strangers. Some of them fall apart under the pressure. Others find strength they never knew they had. Which kind do you think I am? The kind who spent 2 weeks building an airtight case against a man who thought she was too naive to notice his betrayal? The kind who documented every lie while playing the perfect wife? You're stronger than you realize. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of fear she'd been carrying since overhearing Richard's phone call. What happens next? We continue gathering evidence while preparing our case. I want to hire a private investigator to document your husband's current activities and verify the information you've provided. We'll also need forensic accountants to examine his financial records for hidden assets. Hidden assets. Patricia pointed to several entries in Richard's bank statements. These transfers to offshore accounts concern me. Men like your husband often try to hide money before filing for divorce. If he's been moving assets to accounts you don't know about, we need to find them before he can claim they don't exist. The thought that Richard might be stealing from their joint assets while planning to leave her with nothing made Victoria's anger flare again. How long will this take? Gathering evidence and preparing our case. 3 to 6 months, depending on how cooperative your husband's attorneys are. But Mrs. Sterling, you have something most of my clients don't have. What's that? Time and the element of surprise? Your husband doesn't know you're aware of his affair. That gives us a significant advantage in gathering evidence and preparing our strategy. Victoria left Patricia's office with a retainer agreement and a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. The attorney had confirmed what Victoria had suspected: Richard's careful planning would become his downfall, and the prenup he'd designed to trap her would instead become his prison. But as she walked through Manhattan toward her empty penthouse, Victoria realized the legal battle was only part of her transformation. For 20 years, she'd been Richard Sterling's wife, her identity wrapped up in his success and their shared life. Soon, she would be Victoria Sterling again, independent and free, but also starting over at 52. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Richard thought he was discarding her for a younger model, but he was actually setting her free to become the woman she'd been before she'd met him. And that woman, Victoria was beginning to remember, had been formidable. The coffee shop Patricia had chosen for the meeting was the kind of anonymous Manhattan place where conversations disappeared into the background noise of espresso machines and laptops. Victoria arrived early, claiming a corner table where she could watch the door while reviewing the notes she'd prepared for this encounter. Jake Morrison appeared precisely on time, a man in his early 50s with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen enough human nature to surprise him anymore. He wore a simple gray suit and carried a leather messenger bag that looked like it had survived multiple investigations. Mrs. Sterling, he said, extending a hand as he approached her table. Patricia Kowalski speaks very highly of you. Victoria shook his hand. noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. She says you're the best private investigator in Manhattan for this kind of case. I've been tracking cheating spouses for 15 years, Jake replied, settling into the chair across from her. Your husband's not as smart as he thinks he is. You've already looked into him. Patricia gave me the basics. Richard Sterling, tech entrepreneur, currently conducting an affair with a woman named Amanda Chen while planning to divorce his wife. What I want to know is what evidence you've already gathered. Victoria pulled out a condensed version of her evidence file, watching Jake's expression as he reviewed the text messages, financial records, and photographs. His face remained neutral, but she caught his slight nod of approval as he examined her documentation. This is thorough work, Jake said finally. You've proven the affair beyond any reasonable doubt. What do you need from me? Patricia thinks Richard may be hiding assets in offshore accounts. I also want current surveillance to document his activities with Amanda. If this goes to court, I want evidence that can't be challenged. Jake made notes on a small pad, his handwriting surprisingly neat for a man with such rough hands. Hidden assets are common in high-net-worth divorces. Men like your husband usually start moving money months before filing divorce papers. The offshore transfers you found are definitely suspicious. Can you trace them? With the right forensic accountant, yes. But Mrs. Sterling, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Victoria tensed. What? Are you prepared for what we might find? In my experience, wealthy men who plan elaborate divorces usually have more secrets than just affairs. Your husband may be involved in financial improprieties, tax evasion, even business fraud. Are you ready to learn everything about the man you've been married to for 20 years? The question hit Victoria harder than she'd expected. For weeks, she'd been focused on proving Richard's adultery and protecting herself from his divorce strategy. But Jake was right. Men who lied to their wives about fundamental aspects of their lives rarely limited their deception to personal relationships. I need to know everything, Victoria said. Whatever you find, I can handle it. Good, because in cases like this, the affair is usually just the tip of the iceberg. Jake closed his notebook and leaned forward. I'm going to put your husband under surveillance starting tomorrow. I'll document his meetings with Amanda, verify the locations you've identified, and look for any activities you might not be aware of. What kind of activities? Other women, for starters. Men who cheat with colleagues often have multiple affairs, business meetings that aren't really business meetings, financial transactions that don't match his stated income or known assets. Victoria's stomach clenched at the thought that Amanda might not be Richard's only affair, that the betrayal she discovered could be even deeper than she'd imagined. I also want to investigate Amanda Chen more thoroughly, Jake continued. Her background, her finances, her previous relationships. Women who target wealthy married men often have patterns of behavior that can be useful in court. You think she's done this before? Young woman with no significant work experience suddenly employed as a highly paid consultant by a tech company. She either has extraordinary qualifications no one else has noticed, or she has other skills that aren't listed on her resume. Jake's cynicism was oddly comforting. Victoria had been feeling like a fool for not noticing Richard's affair sooner, but Jake treated the situation as routine. Another case of wealthy man's midlife crisis that could be solved with proper documentation and legal strategy. There's something else, Jake said, pulling out a small recording device. Patricia mentioned that your husband has been documenting your behavior to build a case that you're unstable. I want to turn that strategy against him. How? We're going to record him. Not illegally, nothing that can't be used in court, but if he's planning to claim you're mentally unstable while conducting an affair with a woman half his age, we want documentation of his actual behavior and state of mind. Victoria thought about the possibilities. Richard talks in his sleep sometimes, especially when he's been drinking. He said things about Amanda, about their plans. Perfect. A recording device in your bedroom could capture incriminating statements he makes unconsciously. In New York, you have the right to record conversations in your own home. The idea of turning their bedroom into a surveillance site felt like a violation, but Victoria realized their marriage had already been violated beyond repair. Richard had destroyed their intimacy when he'd started planning her destruction. Now she would use his own tactics against him. What about his office? He has business meetings there, phone calls about their relationship. Too risky. His office is private property controlled by him, and recording business conversations could expose you to legal problems. But if he brings Amanda to your home or has phone conversations about their affair in your presence, we can document those. Jake outlined a surveillance plan that would track Richard's movements for 6 weeks, documenting his relationship with Amanda while investigating his financial activities. The cost was substantial, but Patricia had assured Victoria that successful enforcement of the prenup would more than cover all legal and investigative expenses. One more thing, Jake said as they prepared to leave. Your husband is going to notice changes in your behavior eventually. Men who are planning to leave their wives often become hyper-aware of any signs that their plans have been discovered. You need to be careful not to tip him off before we have everything we need. I've been playing the perfect wife for 3 weeks. I can keep it up. Can you? Because in my experience, women in your situation go through stages. First shock, then anger, then a desire for confrontation. You're in the anger phase now, but you haven't hit the point where you want to make him suffer for what he's done to you. Victoria considered Jake's warning. He was right about her anger, the cold fury that had been growing stronger each day as she discovered new layers of Richard's betrayal. But she also knew that premature confrontation would only give Richard time to cover his tracks and prepare his defenses. I want him to suffer, Victoria admitted, but I want him to suffer legally, financially, and permanently. That requires patience. Jake smiled for the first time during their meeting. Mrs. Sterling, you're going to be just fine. Your husband picked the wrong woman to underestimate. As Victoria walked home through Central Park, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just 1 month. She'd gone from trusting wife to private investigator to potential divorcee seeking justice through the legal system. Each step had revealed strengths she'd forgotten she possessed, skills she'd developed during her years as a business owner that could be adapted to fighting for her future. Richard Sterling thought he was discarding her for a younger model, but he was actually liberating a woman who'd been quietly building power and knowledge for 2 decades. And that woman was about to show him exactly how dangerous it was to underestimate someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Victoria Sterling stood in her penthouse kitchen, the same marble countertop where she'd first overheard Richard's betrayal, now serving as her command center for revenge. 6 weeks of surveillance by Jake Morrison had provided devastating evidence of Richard's affair, his financial deceptions, and his plans to destroy her. Now it was time to turn his own strategy against him. Richard entered the kitchen, checking his phone with the distracted air of a man managing multiple lives. Good morning, darling. Any plans for today? Actually, yes, Victoria said, her voice bright with manufactured enthusiasm. I've been thinking about your 50th birthday next month. I want to throw you a proper celebration. Richard's expression shifted slightly, caught off guard by her unexpected initiative. For months, Victoria had been withdrawing from their social obligations, claiming fatigue or headaches. Her sudden interest in party planning didn't match the pattern of behavior he'd been documenting for his attorneys. That's thoughtful, Victoria, but I was hoping for something quieter this year. Maybe just dinner with a few close friends. Nonsense, Victoria replied, pulling out the notebook where she'd been planning this trap for weeks. 50 is a milestone. We should celebrate properly. I'm thinking the Hamptons house. Maybe 60 guests, catered by Daniel. Something worthy of your success. She watched Richard's face carefully, noting the conflict between his desire to appear normal and his obvious discomfort with a large celebration that would require extensive planning and coordination. A party would mean guest lists, schedules, and logistics that could interfere with his affair and his divorce timeline. Victoria, that sounds expensive and complicated. Maybe we should wait until next year when business is less demanding. Richard Sterling, you've built 2 successful companies and accumulated $12 million in assets. I think we can afford to celebrate your accomplishments properly. Victoria's tone was playfully chiding, but she watched his reaction to her mention of their total wealth. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. Victoria had never shown much interest in their exact financial position, preferring to let him manage their investments and business affairs. Her sudden knowledge of their net worth was a deviation from her usual pattern of benign neglect. How do you know our assets total $12 million? Richard asked carefully. I've been paying more attention to our finances lately, Patricia Morrison mentioned that her husband always involves her in their investment decisions, and I realized I've been too passive about our money. Victoria's explanation was reasonable and delivered with perfect casual confidence. I handle our finances because you said you found them boring, and I appreciate that, darling. But I'm 52 years old, and I should understand our financial position better. What if something happened to you? Victoria's concern sounded genuine, masking her real knowledge of Richard's offshore accounts and hidden assets. Richard relaxed slightly, probably interpreting her interest as age-appropriate anxiety about financial security rather than evidence gathering for a divorce. Of course, I'll have my accountant prepare a summary of our holdings for you. Thank you. Now, about your party. I really think we should do something special. I could invite everyone from your Stanford reunion, maybe some of your business associates, the people we haven't seen socially in months. Victoria was testing another element of her trap. Richard's carefully constructed timeline for his divorce required maintaining his image as a stable, happily married man until he was ready to file papers claiming Victoria's instability. A large social gathering would force him to play the devoted husband while managing his relationship with Amanda. I suppose a small celebration wouldn't hurt, Richard said slowly. But Victoria, I don't want anything too elaborate. Keep the guest list under 40 people. Of course, darling. I'll start making calls today. Victoria's smile was warm and wifely, concealing her satisfaction at having maneuvered Richard into accepting her plan. After Richard left for his office, Victoria opened her laptop and began executing the real purpose of her party planning. She wasn't actually organizing a birthday celebration. She was creating opportunities to contact everyone in Richard's professional and personal network while establishing herself as the loving, devoted wife he would soon claim had been mentally unstable for months. Her first call was to James Mitchell, Richard's business partner and oldest friend. James, it's Victoria. I'm planning a surprise 50th birthday party for Richard next month and wanted to make sure you could attend. That's wonderful. Victoria, Richard's lucky to have someone who puts so much thought into celebrating him. Well, after 20 years of marriage, I want to show him how much I appreciate everything he's built for us. He's been working so hard lately, traveling constantly for business. I sometimes feel like I barely see him anymore. Victoria's tone was affectionate but tinged with just enough wistfulness to plant seeds of sympathy. If Richard later claimed she'd been neglectful or unsupportive, James would remember her as a loving wife concerned about her husband's demanding schedule. Richard does work too hard, James agreed, but he's always been driven. Even in college, he was obsessed with becoming successful. I just want him to know how proud I am of everything he's accomplished. Sometimes I worry he doesn't realize how much I admire him. By the end of the call, James was convinced that Victoria Sterling was a devoted wife planning a heartfelt celebration for her hardworking husband. When Richard's attorneys later tried to paint her as an unstable, neglectful spouse, James would contradict their narrative with evidence of her loving behavior. Victoria made similar calls throughout the morning, contacting business associates, college friends, and social acquaintances. Each conversation was carefully crafted to reinforce her image as a supportive wife while gathering information about Richard's recent behavior and travel schedule. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, Richard's longtime physician, was particularly informative. Victoria, how thoughtful of you to plan this celebration. Richard mentioned during his last appointment that he was concerned about your mood lately. He seemed to think you might be going through a difficult period. Victoria's grip tightened on the phone. Richard had been discussing her with their doctor, probably laying groundwork for his claims about her mental health. I have been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately. Richard travels so much for business, and I sometimes feel lonely rattling around in that big penthouse by myself. That's perfectly understandable. Many women your age experience mood changes, especially when their routines are disrupted by their spouse's work demands. Have you considered talking to someone about your feelings? I probably should. Do you have any recommendations for therapists who specialize in helping women adjust to midlife changes? Victoria's request sounded natural and healthy, not the behavior of someone suffering from mental instability. If Richard later claimed she'd been refusing treatment for psychological problems, Dr. Warren would remember her proactive approach to addressing her concerns. But the most important call came from Patricia Morrison, the friend Amanda had lied to about her relationship with Richard. Victoria, darling, of course I'll attend Richard's party. I was just thinking about you yesterday when I ran into that young woman who said she was working on your office design. My office design? Victoria's pulse quickened. I'm not redesigning my office. That's what I thought. She seemed confused when I mentioned it, claimed she was consulting on multiple projects for Richard's company. Very pretty girl, probably late 20s, blonde hair, expensive clothes. Did she give you her name? Amanda something? Chen. I think she seemed eager to establish that she knew you and Richard well. Mentioned several personal details about your life that seemed oddly specific for someone who was just working on your office. Victoria's trap was working better than she'd hoped. Amanda's lies were already creating inconsistencies that observant friends had noticed. When the divorce proceedings began, Patricia Morrison would be able to testify that Amanda had been misrepresenting her relationship with the Sterling family months before Richard claimed the affair had begun. That's strange. I'll have to ask Richard about it. Maybe there was some miscommunication about her role in the company. I'm sure there's a simple explanation. Richard's always been very professional about maintaining boundaries with his employees. Victoria smiled grimly at Patricia's confidence in Richard's professionalism. Soon, her friend would learn exactly how wrong she'd been about Richard's character and boundaries. That evening, Richard returned home with an unusual bouquet of roses and a bottle of expensive champagne. I've been thinking about what you said this morning, about celebrating properly. Maybe a party isn't such a bad idea after all. Victoria accepted his kiss and the flowers, wondering what had changed his mind. What brought this on? I realized you're right about marking milestones. 50 is significant, and we should acknowledge everything we've built together. Richard's voice carried an odd emphasis on together, as if he was testing her reaction to the word. I'm so glad you're excited about it. I started making some calls today, and everyone is thrilled to celebrate with us. Who did you call? Victoria listed the names carefully, watching Richard's expression for signs of concern or recognition. When she mentioned Dr. Warren and Patricia Morrison, she caught a flicker of something that might have been worry. You called Elizabeth Warren, just to make sure she and David could attend. She mentioned that you'd been concerned about my mood lately. I appreciate you looking out for my well-being. Darling? Richard's smile was strained. I just want to make sure you're happy. Victoria, you've seemed distant lately, and I worry about you when I'm traveling. I have been feeling lonely. All your business trips, the late meetings, the weekend conferences. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to a ghost. Victoria's tone was wistful rather than accusatory, but she was sending a clear message she'd noticed his absences and their impact on her emotional state. Business has been demanding lately, but things should calm down after this Chicago project is finished. Victoria knew from Jake's surveillance that Richard's Chicago trips had nothing to do with business and everything to do with weekend getaways with Amanda. But she also knew that his lies were being documented, recorded, and added to her ever-growing file of evidence. I understand, darling. Your success has given us everything we have. I would never want to be the kind of wife who complains about her husband's dedication to providing for his family. Richard visibly relaxed at her reassurance, probably interpreting her understanding as evidence that his strategy of conditioning her to accept his absences was working. He had no idea that Victoria was playing a longer game, one that would end with his complete destruction. As they shared the champagne and planned his birthday celebration, Victoria reflected on how much power came from letting people underestimate you. Richard thought he was manipulating a naive and dependent wife who would be easily discarded when he was ready to move on. Instead, he was feeding information to a woman who was carefully documenting every lie, every inconsistency, and every piece of evidence that would soon destroy him. The trap was set, and Richard Sterling was walking into it with the confidence of a man who'd never considered that his victim might fight back. The key card to Richard's Chicago hotel suite felt cold in Victoria's hand as she stood outside room 1215 at the Ritz-Carlton. Jake Morrison's surveillance had confirmed that Richard and Amanda were spending the weekend together, supposedly celebrating the completion of another business deal. But Victoria had reviewed Richard's actual business calendar and knew he had no clients in Chicago this weekend. She'd flown to Chicago that morning using their joint credit card, the same card that would show Richard's own charges at this hotel. If he questioned her presence, she would claim to be surprising him for their 20th anniversary, which was actually next month. The timing was perfect, romantic enough to seem plausible, early enough to seem spontaneous. Victoria pressed the keycard to the lock, grateful that hotel security still allowed spouses access to rooms registered under joint accounts. The electronic beep seemed unnaturally loud in the carpeted hallway as the door clicked open. "Room service," she called softly, using the cover story she'd prepared in case Amanda was alone in the suite. But both voices that answered from the bedroom confirmed what Jake's surveillance had already documented. Richard and Amanda were together, their conversation carrying the intimate, relaxed tone of lovers who believed they were completely private. "I still can't believe she agreed to throw you a birthday party," Amanda was saying. "After everything you've told me about her mental state, planning a big social event seems like it would be too stressful for her." "Victoria always rises to the occasion when appearances matter," Richard replied. "It's one of the few things she's still good at, playing the perfect wife when people are watching." Victoria moved quietly through the suite's living room, noting the expensive champagne, the scattered clothes, the intimate atmosphere that Richard was financing with their joint assets while planning to claim she was an unfit wife. "When are you going to tell her about us?" Amanda asked. "After her little party. I want the social performance, the perfect hostess routine, all documented for my attorneys. The more normal she appears in public while I'm building my case about her private behavior, the more unstable she'll seem when I reveal the truth about our marriage." Victoria stopped outside the bedroom door, her heart pounding with a mixture of rage and vindication. Richard was confirming everything she suspected about his strategy while providing her with evidence that would destroy him. "I can't wait to see the look on her face when you serve her divorce papers," Amanda said. 20 years of playing house with you, and she never suspected you were planning to leave her. She's not very bright, Amanda, attractive enough for social functions, competent at managing household staff, but she's never been intellectually curious about anything that matters. She's the perfect traditional wife for a man who doesn't want complications." Victoria's southern accent emerged despite her attempt to control it as she stepped into the bedroom doorway. "Hello, darling. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The scene that greeted her was exactly what Jake's surveillance had predicted. Richard and Amanda in hotel robes, sitting on the king-size bed with champagne glasses and what appeared to be wedding magazines spread around them. Amanda's hand was on Richard's chest, her expression intimate and possessive. Richard's champagne glass shattered against the marble floor as Victoria's presence registered. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "Surprising my husband. Of course. Our 20th anniversary is next month, and I thought a romantic weekend in Chicago would be perfect." Victoria's tone was bright and cheerful, as if she hadn't just discovered her husband with his mistress. Amanda immediately tried to distance herself from Richard, pulling her robe tighter and moving toward the far side of the bed. "Mrs. Sterling, this isn't what it looks like. Really, because it looks like my husband is sharing a hotel suite with a woman half his age while telling me he's here on business?" Victoria's voice remained pleasant, conversational, but her eyes were calculating as she noted every detail of the scene. "Amanda is here for the client meetings," Richard said desperately. "She's been consulting on the design aspects of the Chicago project." Victoria walked further into the room, casually examining the wedding magazines scattered across the bed. "These must be very specialized business publications. Chicago wedding venues, planning your dream ceremony, honeymoon destinations for the modern couple. Fascinating reading for a business meeting." "Those are mine," Amanda said quickly. "I'm getting married soon, and I brought them to read during downtime between meetings." "How wonderful. Who's the lucky man?" Victoria's question was delivered with perfect social grace, as if she was making polite conversation at a cocktail party. Amanda's hesitation was telling. She glanced at Richard, clearly unsure how much of the truth Victoria actually knew and how much she was simply fishing for information. "Someone you wouldn't know," Amanda said finally. "We've been keeping it private." "How romantic. Richard and I kept our engagement private too, didn't we? Darling. Though I notice you're wearing what appears to be a diamond tennis bracelet identical to the one Richard gave me for our 15th anniversary. Your fiancé has excellent taste." Victoria's observation hit its mark. Amanda's hand moved unconsciously to the bracelet, and Richard's face went pale as he realized how many details Victoria had noticed. "Coincidence," Richard said weakly. "Lots of men buy similar jewelry for their partners." "Absolutely. In fact, I have the receipt for this particular bracelet at home. Tiffany keeps excellent records. Perhaps we could compare purchase dates to see just how much of a coincidence this really is. The silence that followed Victoria's suggestion was deafening. Richard and Amanda exchanged glances that confirmed their relationship more clearly than any words could have. "Victoria," Richard began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Before you say anything else, Richard, I want you to know that I've been aware of your relationship with Miss Chen for quite some time. I've also been aware of your plan to divorce me using our prenup, your strategy of documenting my supposed mental instability, and your efforts to hide assets in offshore accounts." Richard's expression shifted from panic to calculation. "Victoria, if you know about Amanda, then you know our marriage has been over for months. We can handle this maturely. Work out a reasonable settlement that protects both of us." "Both of us, Richard. Have you forgotten the terms of our prenup? The agreement you insisted we sign before our wedding? Circumstances have changed. We can negotiate modifications." Victoria smiled, the expression holding no warmth whatsoever. "The prenup specifically states that if either party commits adultery, the innocent spouse receives 100% of marital assets. You drafted those terms yourself. Remember to prevent either of us from being tempted to stray." "Victoria, be reasonable. You can't seriously expect to take everything." "I don't expect to take anything. Richard, I expect to receive exactly what our legal agreement specifies. 100% of marital assets, which based on the financial records I've reviewed, totals approximately $12.5 million. Amanda spoke for the first time since Victoria's revelation. "You can't prove adultery based on finding us in the same hotel room. We could claim this was a business meeting that got out of hand." Victoria turned her attention to the younger woman, her southern politeness intact but her words sharp as surgical instruments. "Miss Chen, I have 18 months of text messages between you and Richard discussing your relationship, your shared living arrangements, and your plans for my house after our divorce. I have photographs of you wearing jewelry Richard purchased for you while telling me we needed to reduce expenses. I have hotel receipts, restaurant charges, and travel records documenting your affair in detail." Amanda's confidence crumbled visibly. "Those are private communications. Communications sent using company equipment and personal devices that Richard carelessly left accessible to his wife. Everything obtained legally and admissible in court." Richard stood up, his robe falling open to reveal expensive boxer shorts Victoria didn't recognize. "Victoria, what do you want? Money, a larger settlement? We can work something out. I want exactly what our prenup promises: justice for the innocent spouse." Victoria's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Richard, you've spent months planning to destroy my reputation, claim I'm mentally unstable, and leave me with nothing while you start a new life with your mistress. Did you really think I would simply accept your betrayal without fighting back? You don't understand the legal complexities involved. Prenups can be challenged, especially when circumstances have changed significantly." Victoria laughed, a sound that made both Richard and Amanda visibly uncomfortable. "Richard, I've spent the last 2 months working with Patricia Kowalski, the best divorce attorney in Manhattan. I have a private investigator who's documented every detail of your affair. I have forensic accountants tracing your hidden assets. Your own strategy of careful documentation is about to destroy you." "This is ridiculous," Amanda said, standing and moving toward her clothes. "Richard, tell her we're not going to be intimidated by some scorned wife with delusions of grandeur." Victoria's smile widened. "Miss Chen, you should probably call your own attorney. While you have no legal claim to marital assets, you may face civil liability for your role in destroying a marriage. Some states allow innocent spouses to sue third parties for alienation of affection." The threat wasn't entirely accurate, but Victoria watched with satisfaction as Amanda's face went white with fear. The young woman who'd been so confident about stealing Richard's wealth was discovering that her actions might have legal consequences she hadn't considered. "Amanda, pack your things," Richard said quietly. "This conversation is over." "No, Richard," Victoria replied. "This conversation is just beginning. But you're right about one thing: Amanda should leave. What happens next is between husband and wife." As Amanda gathered her clothes and belongings, Victoria noticed that many of the items were expensive pieces she'd never seen before. Richard had been financing his mistress's wardrobe while claiming business expenses were straining their budget. This isn't over, Victoria, Amanda said as she prepared to leave. Richard loves me, not you. Your marriage has been dead for years. You're absolutely right, Victoria agreed. My marriage died the moment Richard decided to betray our vows. But Miss Chen, Richard's capacity for love died long before he met you. You're not getting the devoted husband you think you're winning. You're getting a man who spent months lying to someone he promised to honor and protect. What makes you think he'll treat you any differently? Amanda left without responding, but Victoria caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. The younger woman was beginning to understand that she'd attached herself to a man whose word was worthless and whose loyalty could be purchased. Alone with Richard, Victoria felt 20 years of marriage crystallizing into this single moment of truth. The man she loved, supported, and built a life with was staring at her with the calculation of a stranger evaluating an opponent. What happens now, Victoria? Now you learn the consequences of underestimating the woman you married, Victoria replied, settling into the suite's leather chair as if she owned it. Richard, did you really think I would spend 20 years building a life with you without developing the intelligence to protect myself when that life was threatened? Richard sat heavily on the bed, running his hands through his silver hair. Victoria, I never meant for you to find out this way. You never meant for me to find out at all. Your plan was to slowly convince everyone that I was mentally unstable while you conducted your affair, then divorce me claiming I was an unfit wife who deserved nothing. Our marriage hasn't been working for years. You know that. What I know is that you've been planning this betrayal for 18 months while I trusted you completely. Every business trip, every late meeting, every weekend conference was an opportunity for you to build a relationship with another woman while documenting my supposed failures as a wife. Richard's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and Victoria saw his face change as he read whatever Amanda had sent. Trouble in paradise already? Victoria asked. She's upset. This isn't how we planned to tell you. How did you plan to tell me, Richard? At my birthday party next month, in front of all our friends? Or were you going to wait until you had me committed to a mental health facility? Richard's silence was answer enough. Victoria realized that his original plan had been even more cruel than she'd imagined. He'd intended to destroy her reputation completely before revealing his affair, ensuring that no one would believe her version of events. 20 years, Victoria said softly. 20 years of marriage, and you were prepared to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal everything we built together. Victoria, you don't understand the pressures I've been under. Building the company, managing investors, maintaining our lifestyle. You've had the luxury of not working while I carried all the financial responsibility. The luxury of not working. Victoria's voice rose for the first time since entering the suite. Richard, I gave up my career to support yours. I managed our home, our social obligations, our image while you built your fortune. Every dinner party, every client relationship, every social connection that contributed to your success required my time and effort. That's not the same as building a business. Isn't it? I built the life that allowed you to focus entirely on making money. I created the home environment, the social network, and the personal foundation that supported your professional success. And now you want to claim I contributed nothing. Richard stood and began pacing the hotel room, his agitation increasing as he realized the strength of Victoria's position. The prenup protects both parties equally. If you pursue this course, you'll destroy both of us. Richard, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply enforcing the agreement you insisted we sign. You drafted the terms specifically to prevent adultery, and now you're discovering that those terms work exactly as written. No court will award you 100% of our assets. Judges modify prenups when the results would be unconscionable. Victoria smiled, remembering Patricia's confidence about their case. Richard, you're forgetting something important. I didn't commit adultery. I didn't plan to defraud my spouse. I didn't hide assets or document my partner's behavior to build a false case for divorce. I simply discovered that my husband was betraying our marriage and took steps to protect myself legally. You've been investigating me for months. That's hardly the behavior of an innocent spouse. I've been protecting myself from a man who was planning to destroy me. Every piece of evidence I've gathered documents your actions, not mine. I never violated our marriage vows. Richard, you did. Richard's phone buzzed again, and this time he answered it. Amanda, I can't talk right now. He listened for a moment, his expression growing darker. No, don't do anything stupid. I'll call you later. More trouble? Victoria asked as he ended the call. She's threatening to go public with our relationship if I don't leave you immediately. How romantic. Your mistress is already trying to manipulate you with ultimatums. Richard, this is the woman you're destroying our marriage for, someone who threatens to expose your affair when things don't go exactly her way. Amanda is young. She doesn't understand the complexities of the situation. She understands perfectly. She's a woman who targeted a wealthy married man, convinced him to finance her lifestyle, and now expects him to deliver the fortune she was promised. When she realizes you can't give her what you promised, how long do you think her devotion will last? Richard sat down again, his confidence visibly shaken. Victoria, what if we worked out a different arrangement? You could keep the penthouse and receive substantial alimony. I would take responsibility for the business assets. Richard, our prenup doesn't allow for negotiation. Adultery triggers the complete transfer of marital assets to the innocent spouse. Those were your terms, designed to prevent either of us from being tempted to cheat. I'll claim the prenup was signed under duress. 20 years after our wedding, good luck with that strategy. Victoria stood, preparing to leave. Richard, I want you to understand something. This isn't about revenge, though I admit the irony is satisfying. This is about justice. You plan to steal my life, my security, and my future. Now you're going to discover that actions have consequences. Victoria, please, we can work this out rationally. We are working it out rationally, through attorneys, investigators, and the legal system. Richard, our marriage is over. The only question now is whether you'll accept the terms of the prenup you insisted on, or whether you'll force me to prove your adultery in court with all the evidence I've gathered. Victoria walked toward the hotel suite door, then turned back for one final comment. Oh, and Richard, you might want to check your offshore accounts. My forensic accountants have been tracing your hidden assets for weeks. Attempting to conceal marital property during divorce proceedings is a serious crime. Richard's face went white as Victoria's words hit home. You can't prove those accounts exist. Can't I, Richard? You've been transferring money to the Cayman Islands for 6 months, thinking I was too naive to notice. But every wire transfer, every hidden account, every attempt to steal our joint assets has been documented and reported to the appropriate authorities. Victoria, listen to me. But Victoria was already leaving, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she walked away from 20 years of marriage and toward a future where Richard Sterling could never hurt her again. Behind her, she heard her millionaire ex-husband calling her name, his voice desperate with the realization that his carefully planned betrayal had become his own destruction. The elevator doors closed on Victoria's old life, carrying her toward a future that would be entirely her own. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely happy. Patricia Kowalski's conference room overlooked Manhattan like a war room surveying a battlefield, and Victoria Sterling felt like a general preparing for the final assault. 6 weeks had passed since the confrontation in Chicago. 6 weeks of legal preparation that would culminate in this meeting between their respective attorneys. Richard sat across the polished mahogany table with his legal team, 2 partners from Goldman, Sachs and Associates who specialized in protecting wealthy men from expensive divorces. His confidence had visibly deteriorated since Chicago. The man who'd once planned to destroy Victoria now looked like someone who'd discovered he was the one being destroyed. Mrs. Sterling, Patricia began, before we present our evidence, I want to give Mr. Sterling's counsel one final opportunity to accept the terms of the prenup as written. 100% of marital assets to the innocent spouse, in this case, Mrs. Sterling. David Goldman, Richard's lead attorney, shuffled through his files with the nervous energy of a lawyer who knew he was fighting a losing battle. Ms. Kowalski, my client is prepared to offer a generous settlement that would give Mrs. Sterling 50% of marital assets, plus the Manhattan penthouse and substantial alimony. Your client signed a prenup that specifies the consequences of adultery, Patricia replied coolly. He doesn't get to renegotiate those terms now that he's been caught. The prenup was signed 20 years ago under different circumstances. No court will enforce a clause that results in complete asset forfeiture. Victoria watched Richard's face as his attorney presented arguments they both knew were desperate. The man who'd meticulously planned her destruction was now dependent on legal technicalities in judicial sympathy to save himself from his own contract. "Mr. Goldman," Patricia said, opening the first evidence folder, "perhaps you should review the documentation of your client's adultery before continuing to claim the prenup shouldn't be enforced." Jake Morrison had outdone himself in the weeks following the Chicago confrontation. The private investigator had documented every aspect of Richard and Amanda's relationship, creating an evidence file that removed any possibility of denial or dispute. "These photographs were taken over the past 6 weeks," Patricia continued, spreading images across the conference table. "Mr. Sterling and Miss Chen entering and leaving her Upper East Side apartment, which bank records show he's been paying for since their relationship began." Richard's attorney examined the surveillance photos with growing dismay. Jake had captured dozens of images showing Richard and Amanda together in clearly romantic contexts, holding hands while walking through Central Park, kissing outside expensive restaurants, shopping together at jewelry stores where Richard continued to purchase gifts for his mistress. "Circumstantial evidence," Goldman said weakly. "These photos don't prove adultery." "Then perhaps these will," Patricia replied, opening a second folder containing printed text messages and emails. 18 months of digital communications between Mr. Sterling and Miss Chen, discussing their sexual relationship, their shared living arrangements, and their plans for Mrs. Sterling's assets after the divorce. Victoria watched Richard's face as Patricia read excerpts from his own messages. "Can't wait to wake up next to you every morning. Amanda. Victoria has no idea how much I love you. Once the divorce is final, everything will be ours." These messages were obtained illegally, Goldman protested. "They should be excluded from consideration." "Actually, they weren't," Patricia corrected. "These communications were sent using company equipment and stored on accounts accessible to Mrs. Sterling as Mr. Sterling's spouse. Everything was obtained legally and is fully admissible." Richard's second attorney, Sarah Brennan, tried a different approach. "Even if adultery can be proven, the prenup's penalty clause is unconscionable. No reasonable person would agree to forfeit 100% of their assets for infidelity. Mr. Sterling not only agreed to these terms, he insisted on them," Patricia replied. "His own attorney drafted the prenup specifically to include this clause, arguing that the severe penalty would prevent either spouse from being tempted to stray." Victoria spoke for the first time during the meeting, her voice steady and clear. "Richard told me the prenup would protect our marriage by making the consequences of infidelity too severe to risk. He was right about the consequences." Richard finally looked directly at her, his expression a mixture of anger and desperate appeal. "Victoria, you don't understand what you're doing. If you take everything, you'll destroy more than just me. My companies employ hundreds of people." "Your companies will continue to operate under new ownership," Victoria replied. "The employees you're concerned about will be protected. But Richard, you should have considered those consequences before you decided to betray our marriage." Patricia opened a third evidence folder, this one containing financial records that made Richard's attorneys visibly uncomfortable. "We also need to address Mr. Sterling's attempts to hide marital assets in offshore accounts." The forensic accountants Victoria had hired had traced Richard's financial deceptions with devastating thoroughness. Over 6 months, he transferred nearly $2 million to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, apparently planning to claim these assets didn't exist when the divorce proceedings began. "These transfers represent marital property that Mr. Sterling attempted to conceal from his spouse," Patricia explained. "Under New York law, such actions constitute financial fraud and can result in criminal charges." Goldman's face went pale as he reviewed the financial evidence. "My client was simply diversifying his investment portfolio. By opening secret accounts and transferring money without his spouse's knowledge or consent, Mr. Goldman, your client committed a felony." Richard leaned forward, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Victoria, if you pursue criminal charges, you'll destroy everything we built together. The publicity alone will ruin both companies. Richard, you were prepared to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal our assets. Did you consider the publicity implications of that strategy?" Victoria's question hit its mark. Richard had been willing to destroy her reputation to achieve his goals. Now he was discovering that his own reputation and freedom were at risk. "We need to discuss a reasonable settlement," Goldman said, his confidence completely gone. "Perhaps 75% to Mrs. Sterling, with guarantees that criminal charges won't be filed? Mr. Goldman, Patricia replied, your client signed a contract. That contract specifies 100% of assets to the innocent spouse in cases of adultery. Your client committed adultery, attempted financial fraud, and planned to frame his wife for mental instability. He's getting exactly what he deserves. Richard's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and Victoria saw his expression change from desperation to something approaching defeat. Trouble with Amanda? Victoria asked. Richard didn't answer, but his attorney's next statement revealed the scope of his problems. Ms. Kowalski, we should inform you that Miss Chen has indicated she may testify against Mr. Sterling in exchange for immunity from civil liability. Victoria felt a surge of satisfaction. Amanda's loyalty had lasted exactly as long as it took her to realize that Richard couldn't deliver the wealth he'd promised. Now the woman who'd helped plan Victoria's destruction was preparing to betray her co-conspirator to save herself. What is Miss Chen prepared to testify about? Patricia asked. Goldman consulted his notes reluctantly. She claims Mr. Sterling promised her half of his marital assets and discussed strategies for proving Mrs. Sterling was mentally unstable. She has recordings of conversations where Mr. Sterling detailed his plans for the divorce. Victoria almost laughed. Richard's mistress had been recording their conversations, probably as insurance against exactly this situation. The man who documented Victoria's behavior to use against her had been documented by his own lover. Richard, Victoria said softly, you chose to betray a woman who loved and trusted you for someone who was using you from the beginning. How does it feel to discover that Amanda was planning her exit strategy before you even filed for divorce? Richard's composure finally cracked completely. Victoria, but please, I know I made mistakes, but we can work this out. I'll accept the prenup terms, sign over the assets, whatever you want. Just don't destroy me completely. Richard, I'm not destroying you. I'm simply holding you accountable for the choices you made. Victoria's voice carried the authority of a woman who'd found her strength. You planned to steal my life, my security, and my future. Now you're experiencing the consequences of those plans. Patricia placed the final document on the conference table, a complete accounting of Richard and Victoria's marital assets, now valued at $12.7 million. Mr. Sterling, you have 24 hours to accept the terms of your prenup. If you refuse, we'll file for divorce and present all evidence of your adultery and financial fraud in open court. Richard stared at the document, his 20-year plan to control and discard his wife reduced to a single moment of legal reckoning. Everything he'd built, everything he'd accumulated, everything he'd planned to share with Amanda was about to become Victoria's property. And if I agree to the terms, you'll retain your personal possessions and whatever assets you acquired before the marriage. Mrs. Sterling will receive 100% of marital assets, as specified in the prenup you insisted on signing. Richard looked around the conference room, probably calculating whether he had any remaining legal options. His attorney's expressions suggested he didn't. I need time to consider. 24 hours, as Patricia repeated. After that, this becomes a public matter, and Miss Chen's testimony becomes part of the court record. As the meeting ended, Victoria felt a transformation she hadn't expected. For months, she'd been fighting to protect herself from Richard's betrayal. Now she realized she'd been fighting for something more, her right to live without fear, without deception, and without the constant threat of someone who claimed to love her while planning her destruction. Richard Sterling had taught her that trust could be weaponized, that love could be manipulated, and that 20 years of marriage could be discarded for the promise of something younger and more exciting. But he'd also taught her that she was stronger than he'd ever imagined, smarter than he'd ever given her credit for, and more dangerous than he'd ever feared. Tomorrow, Richard would sign the papers that transferred everything to Victoria. The prenup that was supposed to protect their marriage would instead become the instrument of his complete defeat, and Victoria Sterling would finally be free to build a life that belonged entirely to her. 6 months after Richard signed the divorce papers that transferred $12.7 million to his ex-wife, Victoria Sterling stood in the living room of her new penthouse, smaller than the one she'd shared with Richard, but entirely hers. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park, illuminating the space she'd designed to reflect her own taste rather than someone else's expectations. Victoria, this place is incredible, Sarah Chen said, settling into one of the custom-designed chairs that showcased Victoria's eye for combining comfort with style. You look 10 years younger than you did last year. I feel like I'm finally awake, Victoria replied, pouring coffee from the machine she'd chosen because she loved it, not because it matched someone else's kitchen aesthetic. For 20 years, I was living someone else's dream. Now I'm building my own. The transformation had been remarkable even to Victoria herself. Within 2 months of the divorce settlement, she'd reopened Sterling Design, the interior design firm she'd sold when she married Richard. But this time, she'd started with advantages she'd never had as a young entrepreneur: substantial capital, 20 years of social connections, and the wisdom that came from surviving betrayal and emerging stronger. The Architectural Digest feature was brilliant marketing, Sarah continued, thumbing through the magazine that had called Victoria Designer to watch how Victoria Sterling is redefining luxury living. 3 major clients from that article alone. Victoria smiled, remembering the photographer's surprise when she'd insisted on being photographed in her work clothes rather than designer gowns. The woman who'd once defined herself as a millionaire's wife was now being recognized for her own professional achievements. The best part is the work itself, Victoria said. I'm designing homes for people who want authentic beauty, not just expensive status symbols. It's the kind of work I always wanted to do, but never had the freedom to pursue. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake Morrison, the private investigator who'd become an unexpected friend during the divorce proceedings. Saw the AD article. Proud of you. Vic. Lunch next week. Victoria had been surprised by how many genuine relationships had emerged from the wreckage of her marriage. People who'd known her as Richard Sterling's wife were discovering Victoria Sterling the individual, and many preferred the authentic version to the carefully constructed persona she'd maintained for 20 years. What about Richard? Sarah asked. Have you heard anything about how he's adjusting to his new circumstances? Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Richard had not handled his reduced circumstances with grace or dignity. The man who'd once controlled $12.7 million was now living in a studio apartment, working for his former competitor after his own companies had been sold to pay legal fees and settlements. Patricia told me he's been trying to challenge the divorce settlement, claiming I somehow coerced him into signing the papers. His new attorney explained that you can't claim coercion when you're simply being held to the terms of a contract you insisted on drafting. And Amanda. Gone within a month of the settlement, Victoria replied with satisfaction. Apparently, a man with no money and a destroyed reputation wasn't quite the catch she'd thought he was. Jake heard she's engaged to a plastic surgeon in Los Angeles, someone new to manipulate and deceive. Victoria felt no sympathy for either Richard or Amanda. They'd planned to destroy her life for their own benefit. The fact that their scheme had backfired was simply justice, working as it should. Victoria, Sarah said carefully, are you dating anyone? It's been 6 months, and you seem so much happier. Maybe it's time to think about sharing that happiness with someone who deserves it. The question didn't surprise Victoria. Several friends had suggested she start dating, introducing her to divorced friends or eligible widowers who might appreciate a successful, independent woman in her 50s. But Victoria wasn't ready for romantic relationships yet. I'm dating myself, Victoria replied with a smile. Learning who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else wants me to be. It's the most honest relationship I've had in 20 years. That's healthy, but don't close yourself off completely. Not every man is Richard Sterling. I know that, but Sarah, I spent 2 decades building my identity around someone else's needs and dreams. For the first time in my adult life, I get to decide what I want, when I want it, and how I want to live. That's not something I'm eager to compromise for anyone. Victoria's phone rang with a call from a potential client, a young couple building their first home together. As she listened to their hopes and dreams for their space, Victoria felt the deep satisfaction that came from helping people create authentic environments that reflected their true selves. I'd love to work with you, Victoria told the couple. Creating a home that truly represents who you are together is one of life's greatest gifts. Let's schedule a time to meet and discuss your vision. After ending the call, Victoria reflected on how much her perspective on marriage and partnership had changed. She no longer saw relationships as contracts where one person supported another's ambitions while sacrificing their own. Real love, she now understood, meant building something together where both people could flourish. That sounded like another project, Sarah observed. A wonderful one. Young couple, deeply in love, wanting to build something beautiful and authentic together. It reminds me of what I thought I was doing 20 years ago. Do you regret marrying Richard? Victoria considered the question seriously. I regret trusting someone who was unworthy of trust. I regret giving up my independence for someone who saw it as weakness rather than gift. But I don't regret the experience, because it taught me exactly who I am and what I'm capable of when I'm fighting for my own life. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor, Patricia Morrison, the friend who'd been one of the first to notice Amanda's lies about her relationship with the Sterling family. Victoria, I owe you an apology, Patricia said as soon as she entered the penthouse. I should have realized what Richard was doing and warned you sooner. Patricia, Richard fooled everyone. He was very good at maintaining his image while conducting his double life. But the signs were there. That girl Amanda, the inconsistencies in Richard's travel schedule, the way he started talking about you as if you were a burden rather than a partner. I noticed but didn't want to interfere in your marriage. Victoria poured tea for her guest, using the china she'd chosen for herself rather than inherited from someone else's taste. Honestly, I'm glad you didn't tell me. If someone else had revealed Richard's affair, I might never have developed the strength to investigate and fight back myself. Discovering his betrayal and learning to protect myself was something I needed to do alone. You've certainly proven you can handle anything. The whole social circle is talking about how brilliantly you outmaneuvered Richard. Some of the wives are quite inspired. Victoria's victory had indeed become legendary among Manhattan's elite women, many of whom had endured their own husbands' infidelities but lacked the legal protection Victoria's prenup had provided. She'd become an informal mentor to women facing similar situations, sharing the legal and investigative strategies that had saved her. I got a call yesterday from a woman whose husband has been acting suspiciously, Victoria said. She wanted advice on protecting herself if her suspicions are correct. It's satisfying to help other women avoid the trap I fell into. Kuna, the trap of trusting completely. The trap of giving up my own power while trusting completely. Trust should enhance your life, not replace it. As evening approached, Victoria prepared for her weekly ritual dinner alone in her own space, reading or working on design projects, surrounded by beauty she'd chosen for herself. The solitude that had once felt like loneliness now felt like luxury. Her phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from Richard himself. Victoria, I know you'll never forgive me, but I want you to know I realize what I lost. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. Victoria read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Richard's recognition of her strength was 20 years too late and served his needs rather than hers. She had no interest in absolving him of guilt or helping him process his regrets. Instead, she opened her laptop and began working on designs for her next project, a community center that would provide resources for women experiencing domestic violence and financial abuse. Victoria had learned firsthand how isolation and financial dependence could trap women in dangerous relationships, and she wanted to use her wealth and skills to help others avoid that trap. The prenup that Richard had designed to control her had instead freed her to become more than she'd ever imagined possible. At 53, Victoria Sterling was successful, independent, and genuinely happy for the first time in decades. The story that had begun with betrayal and devastation had become one of transformation and triumph. Victoria Sterling had discovered that the most important relationship she could build was the one with herself, and that foundation would support whatever she chose to build in the future. Richard had tried to steal her life, but he'd actually given her something far more valuable, the knowledge that she was strong enough to survive anything and wise enough to build something better from the ruins of what had been destroyed. As she watched the sun set over Central Park from her windows, Victoria raised a glass of wine to toast the woman she'd become and the life she'd fought to claim. The prenup promise had been fulfilled, but not in the way Richard had intended. Instead of protecting a marriage built on deception, it had protected a woman brave enough to demand the truth and strong enough to fight for justice. The future belonged entirely to Victoria Sterling, and she intended to make it magnificent.